So the science depends on what we can observe. And there are quite a lot of things we can't. And so I think that has affected science, that it doesn't include the things we can't observe. And but sometimes there are ways to tell that things are missing. Anyway, um, some things that are easily overlooked, unfamiliar situations, the details of things, uninteresting things we don't notice much, things we're not prepared for. If you're surprised by something, you're not ready to respond to it, and you don't hear what was said or done. You have to go back and check. And then there are things that are, pretty much impossible to observe. Things too small or happening too fast that are, poorly lit or hidden from view, or things like relationships. No one can see relationships; they can only act on them. And most designs are invisible, except to the designer. I was an architect for many years, and it's a process of accumulating a very complex, holistic idea of how to make things work, and but then when somebody looks at it later, you don't see the design; you just make it work. And then there's of course contexts. What are contexts anyway? They're often very organized, local ways that things work. A neighborhood, a community, a conversation. Some things are appropriate in some conversations to bring up, and other things not. And the context is sort of in between all that. It's the shape of the whole that's emerging, or at least momentarily present. It makes you wonder whether there's anything at all that we can know. There's so much we can't. But our lives on Earth and life itself, of course, proved that there are things to respond to, at least to recognize and respond to. That's what life is doing all the time, and what we do all the time. Other kinds of life, animals, plants as well, they're all responding to things, and most of life is responding creatively, by internal motivations to external impressions or signals or something. And so but anyway, so there's lots hidden and lots that we know that's very valid. Now I describe that as Swiss cheese sometimes, though, that a lot of the things that are missing from outside observation are the insides of things. That when you're talking with people, you can have a very warm, engaging conversation, but you won't know what they're thinking because that's inside. And it's the same in politics. You'd have no idea what people are really imagining, and even though it looks like they're imagining very crazy things, there might be a lot more sense to it if we could, get through to the inner thoughts. And here I'm showing the cat and the fiddle and the cow jumped over the moon as symbols of the holes that we create for ourselves, the holes in our thinking, the little cells of made up stuff that are imaginations. Now those are much bigger, and dominant in our experience than I've shown on this slide. We all emerge from cultures that give us a map to a whole society's way of working and organizing, thinking, and knowing things. And so our cultures are a very big part of what we know. So they might be the whole cheese. For some people, they don't pay attention to the world. They just act as they're socialized to act and go along. But so there are those are the two main things that are absent from what we can see, and I think that's something that we'll slowly learn about, and it's significant in why we can, for example, see the world changing rapidly and don't know how to respond to it, as that we haven't understood the system that it is. We look at it where we live it from the inside, and we look at it from the outside, and neither tells us very much about how it works. Then there was another one, a couple of guys 100 years ago or so that looked at the cheese of the universe, Heisenberg and Bohr, and saw that we were going to be missing a lot of information because there are limits to what we can observe, and they had very wonderful philosophical views of that. Bohr is saying that physics is concerns what we can say about nature. And of course, if there are holes in what we see, we can't say very much about those. But if we were looking for them, maybe we could. And Heisenberg, what we observe is not nature, but our method of questioning. Yes? No. Okay. But then, perhaps having to do with some of the holes, how did physics manage to describe the principles of nature without any contexts? For example, it seems to be a kind of mysterious omission that systems emerge in relation to their contexts and from their contexts. But the laws of physics are what the rules of measurement that we can know for sure, and they're extremely useful. But that says that there's a great space in between, what we know for sure and what's happening. So here's a physics problem I studied. What is going on in a gamma ray burst? Gamma ray bursts are the collapse of stars into black holes as they're sucked in and ripped apart. There's a huge amount of energy released, and in this case, it's a very large event that takes 5/100ths of a second, or at least the big pulse. The full scale of the record is longer than that. It's I don't know, 20, maybe hundredths of a second, and the data is on the right. Those are the photons that were counted by the I call it BATSE, BATSE is the name of the satellite. Trigger number 551 picked up this recording of a gamma ray burst. So it's a sequential data set that looks like it's pure noise. But it turns out that if you divide that data set into 6 pieces, each sixth item in separated into each of the 6 databases, so entirely separate compressions of the data, and you use a method of smoothing I call derivative reconstruction. It's a method of smoothing that looks at 5 points of data and calculates the and adjusts the points so that the middle point, the acceleration of the acceleration, the jerk, the third derivative, is 0. So this is an innovative smoothing technique, a smoothing kernel in the middle there talks about the ratios, the weight of each point near the center, and the upper one is a single pass with the middle point having 0 weight, and the lower scale is the repeated pass, 10 repetitions of the same thing, where the middle is weak and the strength of the adjacent points is weaker. Anyway, so you see the curves on the left are amazingly organized. Most of them really line up a lot. That's all 6 of the subsets of the data. So these seem to be really genuine physical phenomena, and some of them have very distinctive shape that you could research. But what you can tell as to the shape of a gamma ray burst is, or of the star being drawn into the black hole, is that on the left at over here. Do you see my cursor, perhaps? At 110.
We do.
You do? Oh, okay. Well, I'll only move it in sensible ways. It's a very sharp increase, and then a peak that then gradually declines with an S curve. So there's a very sharp collision between the surface of the star and the black hole on the left, and then layers of the star, it looks like to me, that successively are drawn in one at a time, exposed on the right. Now, an astrophysicist might look at that and say, no, that's not what's happening. That's what it looks like to me. But it gives you questions to look at the reconstructed dynamics of the systems that are interacting. And so what's evident, though, is that conservation of energy still applies at extreme energies and scales of change. That the principle that you can't have a discontinuity in energy flow, you have to have a continuous process to have anything work, is what's demonstrated. Anyway, I guess I should speed up a little. Now, on Earth, we have lots of things that develop with centers. On the left is a hurricane. A tree starts with a cell and multiplies and stabilizes, and people do too, and so do snowflakes and cities generally. And one of the first important centers for human civilization seems to have come from a Bronze Age Aegean Proto-Greek culture that originated the Greek worship of home as a sacred place, as the center with connections. And centers generally are places for sheltered relationships with intermittent external relationships, and that's a universal pattern, and that design of nature uh, is something that seems to have gotten left out of physics and the traditional sciences, as I mentioned before. How did this contextual relationship between centers and connections that organizes all the world we see, how did that get left out? But anyway, these are examples of uh, of it, and then here is the difference between a network of nodes and connections and a network of living centers that relate to their environments and connect with each other. The hives that are within each node, like a town or a person's work, or a family, or any of these things that work. Things that work seem to all have centers and connections, and so um, something. The word organ, which originally derived from phrases that referred to a thing and working. Organ is also implicitly a center with connections, because that's what working is a relationship between an internal system and an external environment. And so here's a bunch more of them. And to emphasize that the visibility of the world from inside and out is very limited. From inside an egg until a chick is hatched, it can't see out, and no one can see in. And the same, of course, with a pregnancy. An embryo developing is unaware of the world and only experiencing the very generous provision of creating its design. So it appears that there's an A-B process in nature of creating the design in disconnected from the world, without the connections, and then a working of the design with the outside world with its connections. And so anyway, on the left is the image of the Earth. Did it develop that way? Well, I don't know. I guess center has to be modified in meaning to talk about it. But certainly life developed over time and continues to. I didn't have space to put in all the images I've collected, but the biodiversity of both land and ocean of fauna is still growing exponentially over time, with little bumps for the 60K collision, and for us, it's likely to. Anyway, that's another subject. So here are there's the tree and the snowflake and then the cell with all its interior designs that multiplies by replication of itself, and the brain, which has a very intense internal experience that no one else can see, sort of permanently. And so there are a lot of these differences, and of course, a couple, the 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 people that were, that uh, we're we're of, that are us, um, and and then that blue thing, those are orbitals of a uh, p orbitals of electrons, imaged as having a complex center with all sorts of active uh, behaviors. And what what is it doing? Well, I don't know. Is it in some way responding to its context? Uh, Undoubtedly. Um, we have no idea. Um, we know we've with regard to the the the, uh, uh, the scientific knowledge, what it can say about nature is the statistics, and so nature's been reduced to statistics as far as we know in science, and it's probably not. It's probably relationships of some kind. But anyway, so then here's the problem is that we, not seeing this, that nature's plan is for things to blow up inside some safe space and then emerge to engage with an environment. Uh, who knows if the universe is going to do that? That's the background image of the Big Bang. There was apparently extremely brief explosion, although it could have been a long one that just was impossible to see, or impossible to have appear in our data. It might have been outside the reach of our data. It may have gone on for a long time, at a much smaller scale. I don't know. But so that's another one of the places where we have limits to what we can know, as well as, of course, what what the Big Bang actually was. How did that happen? Was there a how to it? It had a dynamic, it appears, from all the data, and then why do we display it as expanding more or less statically for the time we've known it, or what we can, not the time we've known it, but the time we can imagine for it from our data. So a lot of questions, and we at the moment are stuck in this place where we're dealing with a Tower of Babel. Our impish little minds have told the brooms to carry the water, and it's flooding everything to bits, and we're chopping up the brooms, and they keep multiplying. That's the Mickey Mouse Fantasia experience. And then there's, of course, the Bitcoin fanatic, money, 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 getting carried away. And but when do we learn that it's more profitable for systems to mature? Why do we need to keep growing? The life gets easier if you grow up, and so that's the thing that's missing from our national and world plan. That there's a big change of plans that comes in every successful growth system. All the centers that develop connections. It seems that, but that's something that's been hidden from our view. And I think partly because science only studied provable facts and not relationships. And there is evidence that that Proto-Greek culture that generated what seems to according to Dinsmore, the great historian, seems to have been the origin of our understanding of home. That center with connections, that on the foundation on which all of societies are built now. It seems that they studied a natural systems view of centers with connection, and that when science came along, that was banished as nature science, which was invalid because you couldn't prove a thing. And but that's a possibility, one interpretation. Anyway, so these stages are something that we all know a lot about. We go through these same stages on different scales in different contexts. We do it with even starting and finishing a sentence, or starting and maturing a relationship, or starting and finishing, the preparations for dinner, or for a move, or for anything, for work in the office. And so it's this pattern of taking off and then growing up, getting things to work in context until you're free to engage in the context. So there's a big, long period of getting things to work in the context you've suddenly discovered as you end your rapid growth period. And so that sequence is something that both Eleanor and Gerald have not spoken about theoretically as much, but they have proven very successful scientific guided methods of resolving system problems. And Eleanor, who got the 2007 or 2009 Nobel Prize for it, and Gerald, who's been at Hull and for ages, and talks widely, solving problems as a consultant as well, doing a lot of different things. Great work. And in fact, every teacher, every parent, private, public, designers, businesses, they all teach being creative in a context and then making it all work. That basic ABC formula for success. And yet, because science left that out to do things that work even more powerfully and certainly, all the laws of energy and other knowledge of engineering and physics, and that made our industrial world, but made an industrial world blind to its contexts. So anyway, that's the slide set, and I guess only 30 minutes. These are slides. These are, I haven't uploaded the slides yet, but they will be. You could take a screenshot of that and then find some of the links. I wrote a paper for SRBS this spring, and there's a draft for that. Yeah, that's the second link there. The slides, the first link, the draft, the second, and my paper from last July, which is basically what I condensed and improved on for the SRBS paper, is the third, and then Eleanor's and Gerald's talks and things are the fourth and fifth. But anyway, so So what do we do with a world that has this wonderful contextual richness that is so hard to describe and so important? I guess that's the question I'll leave you with.
And I see, Nick, that you've put yourself later in the queue by taking your hand down. So I'm going to start with Michelle. Michelle, we are listening.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much, Jesse, for your talk. I'm not sure that I've been very privileged to work with certain scientists who are very aware of context, and they're physicists. They specialize in relativity theory. And I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by context, but they will do work on the geometry, for example, that they're using. And they will make changes to the underlying logic that they're using. And for me, that's part of the context. So, and they're very well aware of the language that they're using. They're very well aware of the philosophical assumptions that they're making. And so I maybe that's just a privilege that I have, and it's not representative of scientists. So anyway, just hear what you have to say about that.
Oh, well, I think that applies to most scientists. They're very attentive to their work, like the financial people are very attentive to their work, and they're highly risk averse within their context, and that they're also destroying the earth ever faster doesn't occur to them because that's in a different context. And so that and other examples, one of the first ones that I ran across was 20 years ago, coming across an article in Eco, the struggling system science journal, about the Russian scientists who were very collegial and very attentive to their work of weaponizing smallpox, absolutely never discussing what it meant to the world if it ever escaped again. So these divisions between contexts is something that I explore by studying the ironies of different in the information I have, where something doesn't quite add up. Like, for example, the financial system. Why does it have such a wonderfully educated and inspired, really, profit-seeking system bankrupting itself? Why is that? So, that gives me some things to dig into. But the physicists you mentioned, I'm sure they're doing great work within their context. But whether it would connect with others is you have to find out.
Okay.
Thanks, Jesse, for that answer. Bella, we are listening.
Thank you. I have a flippant question, but a more substantive one first. In your sigmoid growth curve, you suggest that A and B are the development of the individual, and then it's only at C that we begin connecting to the outside to the context.
No. So I'm talking about B as maturation, which is obviously the introduction to the outside.
Okay, that's what I wanted to say. So, okay, the flippant one is going back to your Swiss cheese, the image I had right away when I saw the picture, but where is the mold? What is the mold on the Swiss cheese that we often find?
Well, yes, that's one of the best things to look for in your own mind. If you are noticing that you have a hole in your view is to look for the fringe and the distortions in the fringe. I don't know how to say to do that, but if to look for my own misguided thinking, I often look for the boundaries and the variations in it, or the various things that are clearly from the thinking. Yeah, yes, there should be mold on the cheese.
I like to think about something I call a conceptual peripheral vision that's relevant here. That you see some minor signal that you very easy to disregard, but just from the fringes of your awareness, and then turn to it and say, then to being alert to the tiny signals that are discordant with your view.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and of course, it's responding to signals, the nonverbal signals that we don't verbally discuss. That is the primary method of human navigation. That we're responding to nonverbal signals all the time.
And this is something I was going to wait and tell you, and I forgot, it just occurred to me a little while ago that context means with text. So that is all the other stuff that isn't in the text, the verbal, and in particular the written.
Well, but it depends on how you interpret the word text. What is written is also what nature wrote, and so what is written is the concept, is what is made in the mind.
Yes.
And so there's a discontinuity between a great many kinds of concepts and what is written in nature. And that's where my studies came from that brought up this subject.
Okay.
But Ron, I will give you an opportunity after Nick. Anthony, we are listening to your question.
Yes, my question has to deal with of course, I experienced again. I think you raised a universal issue about what we know and what we do not know. And I was a member of ecological economics, which I still am. And we raised this question as well, because we looked at the rational economics that prevailed, and looked at the question of trying to find another way of looking at the way we produce goods and services and capital and so forth. So we started investigating very carefully how we could bring back and change the conceptual framework from what, in fact, Herman Daly referred to as the Greek word was krematistika, which is a Greek word for it was contrasting. In fact, the other word was okomonia, ocus. And so there was a contrast between the krematistika, which is our modern age, which is really to make things and do things in a way of maximizing something or other, which was the concept that we're all trying to do, to increase the income of people and to increase the wealth of the nations and so forth. And yet there was something missing, and that was the oikoumenia. It was the household. Somehow or other, the household was ignored. And yet, as you referred to it as well, it is actually a central concept that we should go back to. And that is part of the ecological economics. And there's a chapter in Herman Daly's book on this issue as well. It's called For the Common Good. And you might find it quite interesting because he tries to explore the relationship between krematistika and oikoumenia. So I thought that might be interesting for you.
Yeah, I actually that got on my list just a couple of days ago, having partly to do with watching the degrowth conference in Europe this week, that looking for the roots of all that. And I ordered. I think I ordered the right book. All his other books are much too expensive to write, and I don't know why they haven't been reprinted in expensive versions at the moment. But anyway, yeah, I agree entirely. But the S curve is the part of the key to that every growth system turns from being self-inflating to homemaking at that big change in plans in the middle. That's what the shift from the exponential to the asymptotic curve consists of, is the turn from using resources to multiply the power of the system to using resources to care for the system and its place in the world. So it's going from power to care as a systemic shift, and that's something I think it would be very, very dubious if presented that way to almost anybody on Earth, except that seems to be a plausible path for any kind of growth system that gets in trouble finding its way. Is that its way is to take care of itself and use its money to take care of things rather than to multiply the problems that it's having, which is what our money is going to now. You know, so there's doing the accounting for that is one of the other big things. And I worked with, well, I published an article with the biophysical economics group in 2011 on some of that accounting, and you know, so that's part of my roots too. Yes, it's a and I've been troubled by Daly's work for a long time and sort of avoided it because he didn't look at the cause of the multiplication that becomes the problem. That's of course also a problem with the degrowth movement. They don't look at the systemic causations, and it's a problem with system science too, that they don't look at the shapes of change and impute the kind of system that seems to be at present, and then get the data to verify and understand it. So there's a whole bunch of things here.
Yeah, I just want to make one small comment here, because all like the work that we did in ecological economics, really we have to recognize the fact that we are given something. We live in today in a world that is given to us. There's nothing to do about that. What we need to do is to find methods and techniques and sort of try to convince the people who, especially the specialists and the people who are the economists and the social scientists and of course the physical scientists and natural science as well, that there is another way of measuring what is our well-being and our the way we are. And it's really an issue of changing the method how we measure things. And in fact, if you
in the moment, the world is steered by money, and
exactly,
changing that is only, I think, is only going to be possible if the people who are in control of the money realize that it's unprofitable to bankrupt their own system, and that they're the experts we need to convince that the method of their professional method of securing themselves and their homes and families is not going to work much longer. It's you know, it's degrading and depleting the resources. It's just causing the incredible disruption of change everywhere, where people can't figure out how to live in such a fast changing and conflict-ridden world. But anyway, that's enough. Preaching on that, but
what you observe is correct, but it's because money itself is not a material object. It is in fact an abstract object.
right.
And
Yeah,
therefore, it doesn't exist in the material world, but it has power. And that is the issue that you're concerned about. They have the
Right.
power to change things, having the abstract concept of entitlement to money. And that's all it is. Simple.
well, that's not all it is. It's nested in a whole world of things. Money is one of those concepts that we've disconnected from its contexts. And so learning to reconnect our abstract ideas that are getting us in trouble to the natural world that we need to make a success is the work of Migley and Ostrom and me and a variety of other people, is this re-education by experience with the natural systems.
Yes, we're very pleased that you joined us on this quest.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much. Yeah,
Thank
Nick,
you.
you've had your hand up for a long time.
Yes,
I think I was about to be called.
I
Oh.
just want to ask Ron, do you want to ask after Nick in your position in the queue? Ron, do you have a question to ask after Nick?
Ron's muted.
Yes, I think.
Yeah, he looks like he might be typing.
No, I was just trying to get my microphone working.
Okay, it works.
Jesse, thank you very much for the talk. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very wide-ranging, far more wide-ranging than I can deal with. Maybe I could address just one small part of what you were talking about, and that is the nature of context in science.
Right.
The problem in that area is that science reduces the context to a point where it can make a few judgments in terms of parameters and then produce a model which can be related to measurements.
Right.
In doing so, it takes a very safe viewpoint, because most of the rest of the world it can't deal with.
Right.
There's only a very small percentage of the world that science can deal with, because the rest of it doesn't work. And the classic example of this is the theory of everything. Theory of everything is great in terms of reducing things down to the smallest elements and then seeing how they work. The assumption is that you can rebuild afterwards, but there's no attention to emergence, so it's complete nonsense.
Yeah, there has been a lot of work on emergence, but they've struggled and failed. So there's something wrong with the method.
But in terms of expanding the treatment of context in science, I think Rashevsky and Robert Rosen made a good contribution in that sense to biology, to relational biology, which was still internal, but it's a good contribution, I think. Do you not think that one of the major problems is lack of attribution of personal capability to the problem?
Well, there's so much talent all over the place, and in all sorts of fields, there are geniuses, and I think that it has as much as anything to do with money. That what's profitable is to have rules for control. I call it the remote control of nature, because people in an office say, well, let's use this formula, and then they pay somebody to build a big machine for using that formula, and they profit enormously without ever looking at whose world they're disrupting or how they're disrupting their own world. That separation from context that you just described very nicely, of reducing things to a mathematically describable force or pattern is actually where I also got my thinking on all this. It was 50 some years ago in a physics demonstration first as a freshman in college, of a ping pong ball being thrown in the air and taking a strobe light picture of it, so you get a bunch of dots, getting this is describing exactly what you described, getting a formula from it. And I asked, well, what about the tossing and the catching? And it got a little chuckle, but I didn't quite understand. I didn't know it was, one of the pivotal issues of science at that time.
But there's often a belief that what you are being told is a central issue. Your position is very clearly that it's not. It may be useful, it may be very important, but the central issue is context.
Well, it's a context. It's where the meaning is.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for your patience, Nick. You've got Sean backwards, so Nick, we are listening.
Cool. Yeah, I'm very happy to go to the back of the queue because one of the things that happened last week was a very stimulating conversation between myself and Jesse that went for quite a while, and I felt a bit unprepared for that. And I've spent the last week preparing, so I could very easily just monopolize everything from here. And so I'll limit myself to a couple of points and then go to the back of the queue again.
Try something. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the Heisenberg quote and the Niels Bohr quote. I'm very grateful for those. And I plan to make use of them soon. The Swiss cheese thing, I wanted to comment briefly. It seemed to me that the information was in the holes because those were the bits that I could see through.
Yes.
I found that slide a little confusing for that reason.
Oh, yeah.
And when it comes to
the information that you don't see is in the holes.
But it's the information that I could see, and that was
that's right. Well,
I got a bit sort of like that. Yeah.
The label said that the cheese was our understanding, but
I remember some smart people a week ago saying to me some things about how the labels and the visuals needed to align.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yes. And one last brief mention. Chinese philosophy is very occupied with these questions, and and that's where my hour of holding forth I'm not going to do right now. I'm going to let someone else speak.
Well, Chinese philosophy comes from extremely ancient roots, and there's so many different layers. Hard to know what one is speaking about, but it's pretty clear that the Chinese never heard of Chinese philosophy today, because they're multiplying as fast as they can, trying to destroy the planet they live on, and like the rest of us. So there's something about a disconnect between context and concepts for almost all the cultures on Earth today that accept the current principal power, which is our financially driven growth system.
Interesting, Jesse. Sergey, we are listening.
Yes, thank you, Jesse. I'm wondering if we assume that we are also part of nature, then what do you think? Is it in our nature that makes us go against nature?
Well, I think it's that we have developed a method of seeing the world in terms of our preferred realities. We abstract patterns from nature, assemble them as desirable concepts in our mind, and in the process disconnect them from the context. Just think of all the things that go wrong with things that can go wrong. Like starting a new friendship, you can be too eager, and it's, it ruins it from the start. Or you can put too many pieces into your wonderful new design for a product and have it rejected before any development occurs. So there are a lot of things that that nature nips in the bud, as it were, starts a growth process for and terminates, and that's so that happens a lot. So watching those and learning from them is a way to recognize more and more about the signs of what's happening around us that we don't really see.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Thank you, Jesse. When I listen to you, I listen to a vocational scientist, because you are so passionate for what you do or you bring to the table. And coming to this point of maturation, the P point, change of plans,
Right.
perhaps I worked for many years in the financial industry, and to analyze companies, we used organizational life cycles, which is very similar to this.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is what it was developed by, if I remember well, Arguris. I'll check. I can send it to you
Okay,
later.
good.
But the interesting point is that the prime point is there. It's not on the upper point. There is where an organization has to check how to mature instead of continuing this and the decay. And I think that the same is what we have to do with the society at a large. And also what you brought is this, with these centers that are so common in nature, and we don't use it enough. What I see is that those can be used as attractors if we go bigger, nurturing the diversity and unity with those centers, with different ways of thinking and doing, and bringing something into science that was not there before, or that is hard to recognize or to allow in, like that what is not, cannot be proven, even feelings that are so important, even in economy, because expectations are very recognized in economy and are very important in the decision-making process and emotions and so on. So there is something science has to enrich, because yes, science is the leading, is what leads in the world. It's very, it has an authority. So thank you for what you are. I would like to more about those two, maturation and these centers.
Hey, thank you for bringing those out. Yeah, I would like that link if you remember. If there is a precedent, that's often something that can be mentioned to others, and you don't have to take responsibility for new ideas yourself. That's often dangerous. Yeah, no, how to communicate with the huge culture of wonderfully talented professionals who are taking us on the wrong path at the moment is a big task, and something that none of the activists have responded to so far, all over the place. That's been a non-starter. because they like to blame the professionals. They don't call them professionals. They call them the greedy bastards, So switching words like that with associating people with a pejorative concept is one of the main things that holds up everything in human relationships. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you for that. Bo,
Yes, we can change that, Jesse.
Well, maybe.
Yeah, of course. It's a change, tuning into something better and more beneficial. That's so important to understand, that when the context is more amiable, it is
Right.
easier. So it's
Right.
not so. But if someone is blind to it, the person or society will not get it. So that's a task ahead.
Well, there is a change going on.
Yes.
Definitely there is a change, and we can't see all its fingers. Hopefully there's more good news ahead.
I
Sure.
see a number of people are waiting for questions. Medine, let's listen to your question.
Yes, thank you so much, Jesse. The only thing you left out were two of your favorite topics, culture and language.
Right.
So I will mention, just to keep it very short, something I've mentioned only a few times before, and that is that we're speaking in English. English, according to a Danish linguist, Per Durst Andersen, no relation, has found out a couple decades ago that the languages of the world can actually be sorted crudely into three types, and they have nothing to do with genealogical language families. So English is Indo-European. All languages have enablements and limitations, so it's not a matter that one can judge, one can only describe. English, in his scheme, is a hearer-oriented language, and it is heavily invested in nouns. You point out that our familiar science is very object-oriented and ignores the relationship that it has just to be an object.
Right.
And that's so profound, and I don't know why all these brilliant scientists haven't figured that out long ago. And I can leave it at that. I mean, there are languages that are invested in other things, and other things that won't just be parts of speech. So this is a very crude statement from me. But I'd also point out that we have Robert Rosen and anticipatory systems, and we have Stanley Salthy's developmental, his distinction between evolutionary and developmental systems. And you've described very well culture, bodies, things, they all have lifespans. And in this developmental system that is at the scale you are expert in, although I think you're expert in about all of them, there is an outcome. Development has stages: immature, mature, senescent, or if you want to speak polite, you can say post-mature.
Right.
But that is a limit. The limit isn't absolute power of something that's powerful. No, no, no. It is natural to die. And dynasties die. Everything we know has a terminus. A new club on campus is not going to be forever. You know, nation states are just blips on the radar. So we have to get used to that while we are pretending to be sapient. And so far in our culture, we aren't.
No, I'm so glad to hear Stan Salty's name. He was a good friend for a number of years.
I still am in regular contact with him.
Oh, great, great. Well, tell him hi. I'd love to talk to him. We went to the Los Angeles General Systems Conference together, presented our
Oh,
papers.
really? Oh, he didn't tell me that.
85. Yeah, he was from Brooklyn at the time. So was I. So we hung out together
Oh, that's great.
yeah. And
Yeah.
then I corresponded for ages with him. But senescence was something that he was very concerned with, but I couldn't get him to elaborate on what the systems features were. I hadn't developed my current thinking on it then. I see it as as having the two downward stages of accelerating and then decelerating, and that initially when you retire or when you detach from your previous activity, that's sort of a moment in time when you start to let things slide, and that's part of life for all life forms. It seems that there's you go from intense activity and then make a choice to let others take over.
You can only slide for so long.
Oh, absolutely.
And we are in massive denial, and we have been like forever. And it's not just because we have a noun-centered language, but that is to be taken into account.
Well, yeah, well, we have the successful power-centered language too, of perfecting our sciences of control, to perfect our control of nature and take over the world with both our language and our machines. And so, we're extremely dominant. What I'm more interested about in language is how many of the common roots still have the same meaning they appear to have had all along in each of the languages that recognizes them. And the Indo-European languages, how they grew by sharing new words as if they were new technology, new concepts of how to relate to things, and then pass them around. And so you have different languages coming up with the same concepts because they're mobile.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very
Great
much.
talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks. And now we have Robert.
I think what you're talking about, Jesse, is essential. I think it's the key to understanding systems, that there's a difference between an inside and an outside, that systems have an inside that has an identity. You talk about context, and context for me has a slightly different meaning. I talk about inside and outside as the system and the environment, but I think of context as the source of meaning. Context is what gives us meaning. So in addition, it's that we are part of something larger. It isn't just that there's an outside there, but we're part of that outside. So that the problem we have with the environment is that we observe the environment. Like that's what science says, we're observing this thing called the environment. But there's a difference between observing the environment and understanding that you're a part of the environment, that you're part of the ecosystem, that you're part of nature, that you have a role to play within nature. Like I think this is one of the problems with climate change denial, simply denying that we're affecting our environment,
Well, there's a lot of levels of that. Yeah. The one that I think is probably most important is realizing that what gives context, the ability to give us meaning, is the organization of things in the context. That it's not seeing it, it's not seeing the objects, it's their living relationships to each other, that we can't sense very easily, but we know when we're walking down the street and we're suddenly in a different neighborhood, and it's appropriate to change behavior. You know, we do have these some people call them a sixth sense. I don't know what number it is, but this ability to perceive the contextual changes around us, and that context are organizational is the thing that causes disrupting them to have the terrible effect that it does. But like the extreme right in the U.S. Kind of came from a great fear of losing their place in the world as they were invaded by new ideas, from the 60s generation to the immigrants, to you know, that the simple life that used to exist for many people, and then it got inflated by, you know, any number of things, you know, into a great big wall of anger and frustration. And but these things could get out of control when you have a system for profiting. Our life support system profits from nature and uses that profit to multiply our pressure on everything in the world to produce more profit. That increasing pressure is a widely distributed distress that can't be responded to, you know, and not directly. And I think that's a source of you know, of many of our most wicked problems, that we're escalating the pressure on everyone, and we're at our limit, and it causes our relationships to mess up.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, I think the argument from senescence is important. That one of my favorite quotes is, "Everything that has sex dies." Anyway, great. Thanks a lot, Jesse.
All right, thank you, Robert.
Thanks, Robert. I think we have such a diverse group of people today and such a diverse set of questions. I think that's a testimony of
Wonderful.
wide application of your work, Jesse. Later more. So Nick, and then Pilla, and then a closing. Thank you so much.
So very briefly on power and how do we persuade individuals to do what we need them to do. My perspective is that by the time we persuade Elon Musk to restrain himself at all, there'll be 5 other people that need to be restrained. So we probably need to actually have governments that are willing to take action, and citizenry that ensures that their governments do so. Well,
That's been the case for decades and decades. That when the problems were manageable, the managers should have done something. But I think about in 1970, the problem started to become unmanageable. That the you know, the fox got into the hen house and started eating chickens all over the place. That the financial system became extremely aggressive, and so it's a culture shift that we need, and we need people who study culture shifts to contribute to thinking as to what stage things are at, or what can be publicized. I think, you know, so it's I think just nature at this point seems to be in charge, as we have been negligent, and being observant to changes in the wind. It is good a thing that anyone can do, and caring, and learning that switching from power to caring is our big job, and that's what every successful growth system that lives beyond its startup process, to have a life, it does make that switch from exploiting and capturing and empowering itself to using that power to care for itself, and soon to discover care for others in the context. Because we're going through what does seem to be a birth process of some sort. It's not exiting from a womb, but we're approaching a near-death experience is similar to that, and our job is to change our whole way of thinking, and so in nature, that transition very often goes very smoothly, and so I don't think it needs to change people, but it needs to change culture somehow. But I don't know. One little tidbit I picked up this week was that there is a mass movement in the business world, or in part of the business world, the ESG, the environment, sustainability, governance agenda, which was really riddled with errors for a long time, stripped a lot of its nonsense and began focusing on responding to nature, finding ways to, because recognizing the problems. So that's a big turn. That's a tremendous turn in direction. I don't know how I don't have close contact with it, but switching from business focused on profits, multiplying profits, to profiting from avoiding costs is caring. So that's a hopeful direction that I see.